So I've been getting into a fair bit of fantasy lately, from The Witcher to Fire and Blood, and rereading A Song of Ice and Fire, checking out Discworld, Dark Tower, and the obvious. And one thing that Berserk seemingly lacks compared to most series out there is a map. Granted, Berserk didn't start anything like the fantasy that it would become, but along the years and the storytelling, there's such a sense of this world that's lived in. And now that the man who made this immersive world has left us with so much, let's compile everything from every single piece of media available to us and see if we can make a map out of all of this info. We have very few images of the actual world, and it seems that Kentaro Miura was very purposeful not to reveal much of it. But we can see from the images that are available that there is a similarity and divergence from our own world. There's also a video out there that goes pretty detailed down the path of comparing it to the European continent. Out of respect for that video, I'm going to be referring back to it, whilst also taking into account these differences as best as I can. I'm also not just going to be looking at the continent, but shaping together the locations within the countries as best as I can in reference to it being a bit of a divergent world. More or less, the sole thing that's not too widely available, let's at least make a map of Midland. So Midland, where most of the story takes place, is big, and believe it or not, it takes 5 volumes to get a name drop on Midland. But when we do learn of it, it's right alongside information of Tudor, a neighbouring country at war with Midland for 100 years. Windham is the capital of Midland, with Windham Castle being at its centre. And Windham is a very important location for the story where lots of crucial events take place. Midland is called that because it's the middle of the continent and the middle of the nations that were unified by Geyserik, a legendary figure that, in our world at least, held a kingdom that was centric to modern day France, Spain, and Italy. But again, it's not our world, so I'm going to distort things a bit, but it gives us a sense of how much land Midland encompasses when considering its neighbour Tudor is also fairly large. Casca was born in a village near the border of Tudor, and throughout the story we really see the plight of the common folk as a result of this war, largely because of their proximity to the border. In the west of Midland there are quite a few lakes and rivers. One of these ends up being the setting for the eclipse, which the Holy Iron Chain Knights discover. Further west in Midland there's the Misty Valley and numerous sculptures, the area itself being distantly linked to the astral realm. This is where the fairy tales that Rosine and Jill shared were born. In the south of Midland is Enoch Village, which, once again, when talking about the astral realm, Flora's cottage was located. It's funny to think of all of the destruction that Guts and his posse inadvertently end up causing, but Enoch Village is one of the rare locations that is thankfully saved by the group. Then, to give an example of something which wasn't, the Tower of Conviction is even further west. In the south of Midland there's a fiefdom called Lumias. There's a mountain pass that connects Midland at some point to the sea, because the group use it to reach Vritannis. And this sea is where the united countries under the Holy See meet up to ally against the Kushan Empire, which for the longest time acted as a mysterious continent to the east without much elaboration, so we'll come back to that. Tudor itself has a large stronghold near their border called Doldry, but with fights over this, the border between the two countries is a very malleable thing. There are literally fights in the main series like the Battle of Doldry that change these borders. Thankfully, there is a dense forest that runs along the border, so we can cover the meeting point of these countries with trees and draw a corrugated line between them. To the west of this woodland there's Shet. There's a nearby kingdom called Balden, though we don't know where that is, so we'll place that within its own little circle for now. You can take it with a grain of salt if you don't like the authenticity behind Flame Dragon Knight, but in the north lies the island of Grant, styled the Grand Duchy of Grant. This island is close enough to Tudor that it is constantly attacked, with Tudor holding a fortress at its southmost point, failing to capture the island due to its basin-like structure, whose surroundings are covered in mountainous terrain. Right in the centre of this basin is the city of Nordkapiti, itself being surrounded by the extensive fortress of the Fire Dragon Lair. Whilst being a northern island, it's renowned for its fishing ports, placing it a little more adjacent to that of northern Midland, but logic would place it souther than that of Ys. Ys is a northern principality. This is where Roderick, Farnese's betrothed, comes from. It's a place famed for its seafaring populace. Surrounded by sea, it's made out to be a rougher area to live. Its description reminds me of the Iron Islands from A Song of Ice and Fire or Game of Thrones. This is off the coast of Midland, to the north. Not that it's even a place in the main series, but because it isn't directly mentioned to be north of the Grand Duchy of Grant in that book, I place it directly to the north of Midland instead. To the east are duchies of Morgar and Wallatoria. they are small and often skirmish with the Kushan Empire, so they would physically land next to it, perhaps on the further side of Tudor to make these attacks likelier. Also, we never hear of attacks from the Kushan Empire in Tudor, so it's likely that these duchies take the brunt of those attacks and the bulk of that terrain. Vritinus, along with Nice, Faris, and Lana, united under a Randall Commonwealth. Baldwin broke away from Randall, which suggests a spatial closeness, so we can place those more closely together. In the conversations that elaborate on this, there's talk of a town called Brajou in the north of Vritinus, so we can place that down too. To the south, there's the land of the Holy See, a rich religious country that evokes similarities to the Vatican City, which in our world is surrounded by Italy. Because of the unclear nature of where the allied Randall Commonwealths lie, I'm just going to use an all-encompassing symbol for them and dump them around that area of the Holy See. Farnese's mother, who lives here, tells of isles to the south, so there's land there too, and also speaks to the existence of a coastline which is implicated to not be a part of Tudor. Directly south from the real Vatican City are the likes of Malta, Sicily, and Sardinia, all of them islands and archipelagos, so there's a similar comparison for those if that's the basis for this speech. Skellig is an island to the west of Midland which has Elfhelm on it, though due to it residing in the interstice, regular humans cannot reach it. There's also a small island that Isma came from, the home of a Lovecraftian sea god without a name. So much of the world is probably just undiscovered in the World of Berserk, and especially with the Astral Blast, it's interesting to think about what the rest of that world looks like, and how much Miura might have changed. Maybe he wasn't giving us a map because he knew the world would utterly change after that blast, that he would eventually have to make another one anyway. For example, to go back to Wyndham for a second, it's rendered into rubble by Ganishka and replaced by Falconia, which itself goes on to have a very large presence in the story. There's also the fact that so much of the Kushan Empire is lumped together and how much variance it could have but just stayed in mystery. Then there's the fact that most fantasies have this fascination with the European-like settings, and then it always leaves the Western continent a mystery. Like, what's west of Westeros? I wonder what else was out there in the Berserk world, and it's fun to try and piece some of these things together. For example, Duranki is a manga where the setting is based from Sumerian and Mesopotamian legend, with Anatolia as a likened setting. You can also tell that writing Elfhelm in Berserk heavily influenced his art style, to the point that shortly after the introduction of this land for the manga, he started development for Duranki, a world similarly whimsical and wondrous. With how young that series was in its development, it would have been fun to see it as some kind of ancient Berserk universe or some faraway land. After all, there were some similar motifs recurring between the two, including the spiral design that's present on almost all of the significant religious symbols in Berserk. And then, here we have a story about gods, and it's even present here. Like fantasy that has European inspirations, there's also the Eastern continent, usually a very separate way of life, and largely unknown lifestyle to that within the mainland. Here, this is the case with the Kushan Empire, based off of the all too real Kushan Empire, with Ganishka being Kanishka, similarly to Emperor Geiseric's loosely accurate origins. This is a world that really dives into a fictitious post-Roman Empire and expanded Kushan Empire. I think a lot of the reasons for that, and the reasons behind Miura pursuing Duranki, were out of his obsessions with art. Miura got a degree in art history and studied very thoroughly empires like these, with extensive reference books and the knowledge to spin all of these legendary designs, histories, and cultures together into something new. So here's what we're left with. When all is said and done, I present to you my subjective view. Miura left us one hell of a world, and I felt like it'd be nice to go through and recount all of these memories and moments in the series by mapping it out like this. I hope it's been a nice walk down memory lane for you too, as we round off looking at the World of Berserk. Thanks very much for watching. Comment your thoughts on the map down below, any disagreements you might have as well. I know there are a couple different takes on where things might land, and I may have gotten a couple of facts and figures wrong there, but comment your thoughts down below, like the video for more. Thanks very much to my patrons, and have a wonderful night.